Well, good morning, everybody. Let me start my time here. I'm sure that just like me, you all woke up this morning and said, gosh, I hope I get to see a picture of a spitting cobra today somewhere. Well, there you have it on the bottom left. We're going to talk a little bit more about snakes later in this presentation. This was put together for a very special occasion about 11 months ago. And you can see this depicted in the lower right of the screen there. This is the annual New York Pest Expo put on by my good friend Andy Linares. And he holds it around Veterans Day every year and honors veterans as part of the ceremony. And obviously being a retired Navy person, it meant a lot to me to be able to participate. So what I'm going to do for the next hour is I'd like you all to, if you can, somewhere wherever you keep your physiological switches, reach in and flip off that pandemic switch, and let's sort of forget about that for a while, and have a few laughs, maybe a little bit of a world tour here, and some lessons learned that I think not only can be applied to your professional lives, but some of them personally as well. I know I certainly do. All right, well, now my slides don't want to go forward. And we practiced all this, didn't we? There we go. Got to click on the screen. Vector control and pest management, when you're dealing with these folks that you see here on the cover of Time magazine from a few years back, is really, there's some overlap, but a lot of it is completely different. And you'll see a lot of the reasons for that as I go through my talk today. And here's sort of what we deal with. How these three guys ever managed to all fit on that bench and sleep without waking each other up, I don't know. But the troops in the field do the darndest things, kind of like that old Art Linkletter show. Here's another example. This fellow has found a comfortable place to sleep with his machine gun there across his chest. He's using a rock for a pillow. And undoubtedly, this is in the Middle East, undoubtedly there are phlebotomine sandflies throughout those rocks and the area where he's sleeping, and they very well may be infected with leishmania parasites. Discipline in the field is a problem. I'm going to talk more about that a little bit later, but it's hot in a lot of these places, and these men and women work very hard, and when they get a chance to sit down and clean their weapons and have a little something to eat and drink, they frequently like to remove their uniforms, which are usually treated with permethrin. Sometimes they even strip down into their PT gear, which is shorts and t-shirt. This is one of my favorites. Here's a couple of guys who are just, catching a snooze wherever they can. But what I want to point out to you is even though they are not wearing their shirts, they are still keeping their gas masks on. So it can be very difficult to try to protect these folks. And this is an iconic photograph from the Gulf War. And I just want to point a few things out. Obviously, you can see this young man sleeping on the hood of his Humvee. But notice in the yellow circle, he's from the Illinois Air National Guard, which I happen to live in Illinois, by the way. And who knows, he may have never been out of the state of Illinois, but suddenly he finds himself in this type of an environment. He's taken a nap. He's got his boombox there. And if you look just to the left of that on the hood of the car are his official military issue BCG glasses, birth control glasses, because no one will go near you when you wear them. And notice up here on the top of the Humvee, those are his boots with flea collars around them. One of the big issues that we had, particularly during this conflict, was people were sending these types of things over to the troops and they were not using them correctly, which they shouldn't have been using at all, but putting them on their skin and developing things like this. So it's a constant struggle to, when you're in the field deployed with the troops like this and they're facing things they've never faced before, it's a constant struggle to keep vigilance over the products that are coming to them from overseas, either from family or what I like to call do-gooders. And last but not least, while he's slumbering in that hillside just back there behind him, there was a large colony of fat-tailed desert rats that we know were a reservoir for cutaneous leishmaniasis. So the bottom line is this, these folks are exposed 24/7, and as I said earlier, protecting them can be quite difficult. So here's just a few key points to remember as we go through this. And this concerns mainly military entomologists, and we'll talk more about what that looks like in a minute. But first, these folks have a very broad responsibility early in their careers. You can be dropped into certain situations on your first or second tour as a military entomologist where you're in charge of literally hundreds of people and maybe millions of dollars. Second is, and this is another key point, they're not just bug folks. And the broader the training that a person has as a military entomologist, the better off they'll be. Frequently, you might be the only, quote, medical department person in an entire area. So anything that comes up, besides actually treating people, you're going to be asked to deal with it. And it's a wrong answer to say, well, you know, I'm just a bug guy. You may be asked to get rid of this dead manatee on the beach here or to figure out what to do about it. So you have to be prepared for almost anything, just like many other aspects of our lives, I guess. Another key component, these folks will have limited space for gear. They don't have these nice spray trucks that you all have. They can't, you know, mount out with a bunch of traps. They rarely will even have a dedicated vehicle, even if they are lucky enough to have a sprayer in the field. So the reason I put the picture of this helicopter in here is sometimes when you're deployed, you may have 6 places that you need to visit that day to do usually fly control, but other things too. And so you can talk to the helicopter crew and they may be going out to those places to pick up mail or drop off supplies or something. And they may be willing to give you a seat in the helicopter, but anything that you can't hold on your lap or put in your pockets of your cargo pants isn't going to go. It's just that simple. Preventive medicine is generally pretty low on the totem pole when it comes to this type of stuff. It's 2 careers. You are a military officer first and foremost, and secondarily, you are a entomologist and scientist. And sometimes those overlap very nicely, and other times they almost couldn't be more divergent. Promotion is very competitive. I don't need to say too much more about that. That's when I'm talking to people about careers in this field, but it's very, very difficult to make a senior rank just as a bug guy. But here's some good news, and some of you know about this. People who serve in the military as a medical entomologist are highly employable when they come out of the military because of all the skills they have developed. So let's step back in time here just a little bit. It's only been about 140 years or so since we've known about the association between arthropods and pathogens. And if you think back on the time of the germ theory, which was developed in the 1870s up to about 1880, these are the 2 main folks who were involved in it. The bottom left there is Louis Pasteur, a French chemist who essentially saved the silkworm industry and the wine industry. God bless him, he saved the wine industry in France. Can you imagine? What a hero. Figuring out microbes. And then in the top right is Robert Koch, who was a German physician. And of course, he developed what are now known as Koch's postulates about infection and causation. And so depending sort of on which side of the fence you land on, these are the 2 folks that essentially developed the germ theory. And then I just want to go through a few of the key discoveries in the field of vector-borne disease. And the 3 people I'm going to highlight here were all military folks, although they were not entomologists. They were all medical doctors. The first is Alphonse Laveran. He was a French physician in the French military, working in Algeria. And in 1880, he was the first person to see malaria parasites in Anopheles mosquitoes, for which he won the Nobel Prize in 1907. And here you see drawings from his original laboratory notebook showing the various stages of malaria parasites. The 3rd line there, you can see gametocytes, and then the 4th line is exflagellation. One of the next, and there are lots of other discoveries about this time. This is really the golden age of medical entomology is what it's called, but I'm just highlighting a few of them. This is Sir Ronald Ross, who was a British physician in the British Army. And while working in India in 1897, he described the entire life cycle of avian malaria in Culex mosquitoes and birds, for which he won the Nobel Prize in 1902. So people were really starting to think about these things. This is Ronald Ross's notebook from what he deemed Mosquito Day, which was 20 August 1897. We still celebrate it every year. And I've been fortunate enough to actually hold his notebook in my grubby little hands. I tried to steal it, but they caught me. And see this page, and you can see his drawings here as well. And then the real crown jewel of all this, you all know that I like Walter Reed, and I love talking about him, and I have to put him in every one of my talks. And here he is again. But the Reed Commission in 1900 showed without a doubt in Cuba that the yellow fever virus was spread by Aedes aegypti and not by poisoned air or contaminated objects. So those three discoveries, along with others, some USDA folks, Smith and Kilbourne and others, but that really set the stage for the rest of medical entomology's growth during this time. And it all came about from folks who were in the military. So there really wasn't much entomology involvement in America's conflicts until World War II. There was a little bit in World War I, but not very much, and I wasn't able to find too much about it. But holy moly, in World War II, it really took off. In 1943, there were 723 roughly entomologists working for the Department of Defense, many of them in the war zone, particularly in Southeast Asia. The major things that they had to deal with were malaria, typhus, Tsutsugamushi fever, which I love to say, that's mite-borne. That was mainly in the South Pacific, and then in the European theater, there was sandfly fever, and also typhus was a significant issue. Discipline was a problem. Discipline with using preventive action. So I don't know if you're aware of this, but if you take a close look at that panel on the bottom right, that should look familiar to you. The government decided that they needed to hire somebody that folks were comfortable with and familiar with to try to get this message out to the troops that they needed to pay a little more attention, particularly to malaria, to the use of repellents and stuff. And so they hired Dr. Seuss. And this is just one example of what he did. This character was Anne Opheles, and you can see there she drinks blood, et cetera, et cetera. And it was a very, very successful campaign. And his original panels are still in existence, and they're probably worth some money nowadays, I guess. And in both of the theaters, of course, bedbugs were a huge issue. And I'll take a minute to just apologize here. I have a little bit of a throat thing going on, so if I get gravelly, it's just going to happen. This is one of the most famous quotes in the history of military medical entomology. That's Douglas MacArthur in the top right. And in 1943, he said to Dr. Paul Russell, and I'm going to read it, "Doctor," he said, "this will be a long war if for every division I have facing the enemy, I must count on a second division in hospital with malaria and a third division convalescing from this debilitating disease." So MacArthur really understood it. And I'll tell you that when you're in the field as a preventive medicine specialist and whoever is in command understands what you're up against and what you're trying to do, it makes the job a whole lot easier. Just one other area I want to highlight, and again, some of you may know this, but the majority of you probably don't. Three of the main tools that we still to this day use in vector control were developed primarily by USDA scientists working on the needs of the Department of Defense. And those are, you're going to recognize all of these, ultra low volume spray. That whole technique was developed by USDA. Secondly, DEET was developed by USDA, and this picture shows the old bottles of DEET that were strapped into the helmets. The troops didn't, that's one of the original bottles. The troops didn't really like wearing this, wearing the DEET. It had a very strong odor, and it also had a propensity to melt plastic. And so sometimes they put the DEET on and then slide on their military issued glasses, which were a form of plastic, and the glasses would melt, which is generally not a good thing. And the third one is repellent treated clothing. Carl Schreck and others were the ones that really led this effort and showed that it could work. For years and years and years, we just used the aerosol cans and sprayed the material onto the clothing. Now many of the uniforms are factory treated, and it lasts, I think, up to 50 washings. I've been retired for a few years now, and I've forgot some of this, but I'll just make it up as I go. And we still have, within the military entomology job structure, we still have positions with USDA and with the CDC lab in Atlanta. So based on these things, this is the DOD insect repellent system, which was, again, USDA and DOD developing this together. And it's simply, if you treat your uniform, if you use DEET properly and wear the uniform properly, it's 90-some% maximum protection. But usually we can get the uniforms treated. Getting folks to use repellent can be difficult. And you've already seen some pictures of people not wearing their uniforms. It often surprises people when they find out that the United States Department of Defense is the largest employer of medical entomologists, although they're not all trained strictly as medical entomologists, but that's their main job. There are currently roughly 114 in the Department of Defense. The Army has about 55, and I guess they fly around on these big mosquitoes. The Navy has about 44, and the Air Force has about 15. And I'm not going to essentially go into what each service does. There are some minor differences, but we'll take a look at some of the major areas that these entomologists operate in. The requirements to join are pretty simple in case you're looking for a career change, or you may be in academia and there are folks that might want to be interested in this as a career field, or maybe just to do it for, you know, a couple of tours, 3 or 6 years. It's pretty simple, actually. An MS or PhD in entomology or a related science. So it can be environmental health or something, as long as you've had some training in entomology. There's an age requirement. You have to get in by a certain age. I think now it's 42, but I'm not 100% sure. A recruiter can tell you that. It used to be 35. And there's a physical fitness requirement and a couple other things. So it's not a huge hurdle to get in. And these folks, the active duty folks, concentrate mostly on the troops, the uniformed troops. And fortunately, they're backed by a very strong cadre of civilian entomologists. Army, Navy, and Air Force all have them. Many of them are very senior folks and have been around a long time. And they oversee a lot of the pest management on the bases, both domestically and overseas. And the overarching sort of linchpin or keystone, I guess I could say, since I'm speaking to the Keystone State today and others, sorry, New Jersey, Maryland, and Delaware, is the Armed Forces Pest Management Board. And you can find a lot of really good information at their website, afpmb.org. It's open access for the most part. And I'll show you a few of the products here in a minute that you can find there. But if you want to find out more about what military entomologists do, there's a section on that website where you can find all that information and contact information. Obviously, they have a global presence. This map is a little bit dated. Some of these places have closed down now, but essentially you can see that there are a few places in the world where a military entomologist isn't too far away. So let's look at a few general areas of what they do. And some of the things that I've highlighted here, I think, apply to your jobs as well. And I think you'll see what I mean here. Sometimes when you're deployed with the troops, again, you're often a small voice in the wilderness as a preventive medicine person. Sometimes you're even lower than whale poop. And sometimes all you can do is advise and then stand back. And, you know, I've had commanders in the field say, we're going to put the camp right here. And I'll say, well, sir, that is right on top of a leishmaniasis reservoir rat colony. And they'll say, that's your problem, Lieutenant. They're not going to move. So, you know, sometimes the best thing you can do is advise your bosses and document it. And then, you know, stand back and prepare to alter your course and do the best that you can. I probably don't need to tell all you folks this, especially those that are public servants, but perception really matters. And this is really true on deployments where, you know, people have a lot of idle time on their hands. It's going to be hot. There may be fly issues. And when they see the medic or the preventive medicine person coming around, in this case with a thermal fogger, and doing their job, it improves morale. And, you know, I think the same applies when you work for the taxpayers, when they see you out and about, you know, maybe with your brightly colored shirts or something, and they say, oh, the mosquito people are here. That sort of changes their perception of what's going on. And sometimes it can really help to lessen the problem, even though maybe you haven't killed everything that you wanted to. And we all need to demonstrate our successes. Here are two really happy guys who were cleaning flies out of a chow hall in the field, which was essentially a tent, using those beautiful gold sticks. But it's always important to, when you have successes, to demonstrate them so that people know that you're making a difference. Another area I just wanted to mention briefly are agricultural washdowns. These are done worldwide in conjunction with the United States Department of Agriculture. Anytime the troops come back from a deployment anywhere in the world, they have to be inspected. Sometimes you have these really nice wash racks here, like you see in this picture, that you can go under, and you have a high pressure hose and you can blast away. Other times you may literally be on your back, kind of like changing the oil in the field or changing a tire and crawling under the vehicle. But the requirement is you can only have road film on these things, and it's incredibly strict because, as you know, unfortunately, a lot of invasive pests have been brought in with returning troops. It applies not only to equipment, but also personal gear. I've been involved in these when we did as many as 50,000 vehicles. It took a whole week to do it, working 24 hours a day. So these can be very big jobs. Sometimes, you know, I finally got to speak live last week to 125 people, and the thing I missed the most was people's facial reactions when I was trying to do something funny. So I think if we all want to improve Zoom, we can figure out a way to put a laugh track in or something, but that's for another day. Sometimes these infestations in these vehicles are incredibly serious, and they can be dangerous. Snakes are very common, ant colonies, stinging ants, things like that. So you really, spiders are another one that we would find frequently. So you really have to be careful when you do these. Information products, military entomologists produce these. Sometimes they're vector specific, as you see here. There's also a very nice one on the Armed Forces Pest Management Board that is all about venomous animals and plants all around the world. Sometimes these are done by region. There may be one on Southeast Asia, for instance. Many times what we know about different countries are kind of the same, so we'll lump them together as regions, or they may be country specific. And here's an example of a disease vector hazard report on Yemen. You see the cover on the left, and on the right are all the different websites where you can find articles about those different vectors. So these are great resources. As I said, some of them are available and to the public and some are not. Training and certification is very, very important. This is one of the main things that the Armed Forces Pest Management Board oversees. As far as DOD is, as EPA is concerned, DOD is the 51st state when it comes to training and certification. So DOD has their own training program, their own certification process. And when you think about it, with the troops moving every couple of years or 3 years, either to a new state or overseas, trying to keep those credits up in the initial certification can be very difficult. So this is a nice compromise that works very well. And it's for initial certification and research, just like is done in our states. There's a global reach. These courses are taught at various centers around the world. It's very interesting to teach through a translator. If you've never done it before, you can't go through all your material. You have to figure out what really matters and what they need to know. There's also some specific courses. All the services teach some form of an operational entomology course. Here you see an Air Force entomologist in the field, and it looks like he's trying to do a magic trick there, but he's talking about ticks. I make fun of all the services equally, so if we have any former Air Force or Marines out there, please don't take it as a slight. And then there's also aerial spray training. The United States Air Force has several C-130s, and I'll show you a little more about that later, that are outfitted to do wide area vector control as other services. This is one of the categories that I really enjoy talking about, and it doesn't get into the news very often. And just, I'm not going to bash the media here, but a lot of times it's not the good news that gets into our systems these days. The picture that you see here is two of the Navy's hospital ships. They are 1,000-bed capacity, full operating rooms, everything that you can want. And they frequently deploy on these global health engagements. And I'll just give you some examples here. Some countries, the DOD has several overseas research labs now that mainly focus on infectious disease surveillance. And frequently, one of the countries in their area will have an outbreak of fever of unknown origin, or something, and they just don't have the capabilities of trying to figure out what it is and stop it. So oftentimes, specialty teams are brought in and put together, kind of like the old Mission Impossible thing. Who do we need to take on this? And those are great fun to do. I'll give you an example of one of them a little bit later. There's a lot of different types of humanitarian assistance that's done. This is the crew on one of the recent deployments of one of these hospital ships. And I'm circling there my good buddy, Captain Mike Medina, who had a chance to go on this. They're really fun, and you get to know a lot of great people, and usually visit 7, 8, or 9 different countries. Refugee situations is a big one. We don't have time to talk too much about it today, but doing vector control and pest management in refugee situations can be very, very dicey for a number of reasons. One of the things that is really sensitive is trying to drive around and spray or do any aerial spraying over these people for reasons that you can probably figure out. Disaster relief is another big one. One of the recent examples was the huge earthquake in Haiti. One of the hospital ships went down there, and if I recall correctly, they did over 900 surgeries and repairs on people who'd been sort of smashed up in the debris there. Civic action programs is another one. This is basically going into a village with a medical team, and for the day they do things like make simple eyeglasses, pull teeth, maybe do some minor surgery, some public health stuff. These are often joint training exercises. Joint means with other countries. And generally, military entomologists can be anywhere in the world within 24 to 48 hours. So they're generally packed up and ready to go. And as I said, they're often multinational efforts, such as the peacekeeping force in the Sinai Peninsula. All right, for the next 30 minutes or so, I call this the Dirty Dozen. For those of you who don't know what that is, it was a great movie from 1967 starring Lee Marvin. And these characters on the right, Charles Bronson, Telly Savalas is in there, and others. And so I've sort of nicknamed these 12 examples the Dirty Dozen. And what I'm going to do is go through some of sort of what I consider greatest hits, many of which are quite humorous, but they all have significant lessons learned. Again, not only toward operating in the military, but I think in any of the things that we do in our public lives. So that's what we're going to focus on now. Here's the first one. The children are being eaten alive. My first tour in the Navy, I got a call. I was in Jacksonville, Florida, and I got a call from the Naval Supply Corps School in Athens, Georgia. And this is not the actual tire ramp, but the daycare center there had put in a tire ramp, you know, for the kids to climb up and down on and play on and everything. But the kids were getting chewed up by what turned out to be the Asian tiger mosquito. And so I put on my nice white, I'm here to sell ice cream uniform, and went up there, and there was a big gaggle of people to see what I was going to do. And I simply looked in the tires, and, you know, it was the usual thing. They were filled with water and debris, and they were breeding mosquitoes. So I proudly announced that we would solve this without using any pesticides. You know, we're going to use integrated mosquito management, blah, blah, blah. And I instructed the public works guys that all they had to do was to drill holes in these tires large enough that all the water would drain out, and to keep any debris from going in there, you know, to clean them out once a week or whatever, and that would solve the problem. Wrong. I got a call about 6 weeks later, and they said, Lieutenant, that didn't help. So I went back up there, and honest to God, they had drilled the holes in the top of the tires, not the bottom. So the water wasn't draining out. I kid you not. So What do we learn from a situation like this? Well, the first one is clear communication. You know, I had worked around these public works folks, and they're not the sharpest pencils in the box. And I should have demonstrated to them very clearly where to drill the holes. And I didn't, and they didn't figure it out. Second was don't make assumptions. I just assumed that they would look at the water in there and they would drill the holes, you know, sort of the same thing. And thirdly, it's important, and this is one of my leadership tenets, it's important to fix the problems and not the blame. You know, there were a lot of people there when I went back, and I could have said something about it, and I didn't. And I just pulled the people aside that needed to know, and I said, you know, the holes are in the wrong place. I didn't make a public announcement about it and put those guys on the spot. So that's number one. Number two, this says, who the hell are you? I think it was 1989 when Hurricane Hugo slammed into Charleston, where at the time we had a lot of ships and some bases. And again, I was stationed in Jacksonville, Florida, and all the communication was cut off. Remember, there were no cell phones. I know that's hard to believe. There was no social media. About the only way to communicate was probably by fax, but all that was down. It was a horrific thing. So I was fairly new to the Navy. I'd been in all of about a year, and they decided to put me in a white van with some supplies and to drive up to Charleston and, quote, find out what the hell's going on up there. So I got up there and I found the building that I thought was where the decision makers were. And I walked in, and this admiral was sitting there with his feet in about 6 inches of water. And he looked up at me and he said, "Who the hell are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm here to help." And he said, "Oh, yeah?" And I said, "Yes, sir." Basically, what I told him was that within about 2 weeks, they were going to have so many mosquitoes out that they literally would not be able to be outside and breathe. And he said, "Well, can you do anything about that?" And so I told him about the Air Force Aerial Spray Unit. And I said, "I'm going to need your help in contacting them and getting the approvals, yada, yada, yada." And I thought he was going to hug and kiss me, but he didn't, because that would have been improper. But literally within about 10 days to 2 weeks, we had the C-130 up there spraying and knocked the mosquito populations way, way, way down. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been, people wouldn't have been able to function. So what can we learn from a situation like this? Well, first of all, and I really want to stress this one because I think we all forget about this. You are experts in your field for the most part. Some of you may be students. By the way, I think we have some folks on the line from Gettysburg College, I think I saw, and I hope those are students and that you're getting excited about this field. But we always need to remember, whether we're, you know, talking to our board of trustees or testifying in front of Congress, or maybe, you know, doing your state visits when you need to go to the Capitol for advocacy. Always remember that you're the expert, so you need to project that and be confident. And I think we fail in that sometimes, or we don't do it as well as we could. Number two is patience is a great virtue in this situation. This admiral had a lot of things he had to get to. You know, he had a lot of things to deal with, and I had to spend, you know, just 2 or 3 days just hanging out there with my feet in the same water his feet were in, because there really wasn't any place to stay, and waiting until he could get down to the mosquito issue on his list. And then also you need to be empathetic. Again, I think a lot of times we all, you know, think that what we want to do is the most important thing, but you know, always be aware that other people have things pinging on them, and as long as you remember that and work with them and not against them, you'll be a lot more successful. So that's number two. Number three is, where did my mosquito trap go? So now we're going to go to Egypt. I had the pleasure of serving there for 2 years. You're looking at a small village on the upper Nile, which is away from Cairo, and that's the Nile River there. And we had an 88-person team deployed there with people from the United States as well, to investigate an outbreak of Rift Valley fever. And so we were doing the usual, you know, trapping out in the villages and doing the things that, you know, you would do, virus isolations and stuff. And but it was so hot and there were so many mosquitoes there that we didn't just put the traps out and collect them first thing in the morning. we went around every couple of hours and emptied them. Otherwise, the mosquitoes were dying in the bags. So again, I was fairly new. I was working with a very famous Egyptian medical entomologist named Abdel Gad. And we went to one of our trapping sites in this particular village and the trap was gone. And I'm like, oh man, you know, we need these samples. And it was evening time. And so he said, Stan, wait here. And I kind of said, well, where are you going? He said, you just wait here. Don't leave here. So I said, okay. And the next thing I knew, you're probably familiar with the mosques that they have in all these places and the call to prayer that they do. Well, suddenly I hear my friend on the loudspeaker saying something in Arabic that I did not understand. And he went on and on for about 5 minutes, you know, blaring this message away. And I'm kind of looking around wondering what's going on. And a couple minutes later, these two young boys came back and they had my CO2 trap. Nothing had happened to it. And they just walked up and they handed it to me and ran away. And shortly thereafter, Dr. Gad came out of the shadows. And I said, where were you? What were you doing? Was that your voice on the loudspeaker? And he said, yes. And I said, what did you tell them? And he said, I simply stated that Allah was an entomologist and he wanted his mosquito trap back. That's a true story. So what did we learn from this one? Many of you have probably worked overseas or will eventually work overseas. Cultural awareness is a really important thing, but this can apply in the United States too. You know, and there in Pennsylvania, you have a perfect example of the Amish folks, and you know they live a little bit differently. And if you're working among these different types of groups, whether it's in our country or overseas, the more you learn about how they operate, about their culture, particularly if you can try to learn a little bit of the language, you're going to have much more success than you would otherwise. Secondly is trust your team. When he told me to stay there and that he was going to go off, I was hesitant about it. And I sort of doubted what was going to happen, but I should have trusted him more than I did. So trusting your team is really important. And then third is don't overreact. We probably all tend to do this at certain times. It really accomplishes very little if you look back on it. Overreacting usually doesn't help you solve the problem. And sometimes it makes it worse. Okay, let me get a little drink of water here. Don't shoot me, I voted for him. You are looking live, like Brent Musburger used to say. This happens to be the old Naval Observatory where the Vice President of the United States lives. And back when the Lyme disease thing was really taking hold, it was decided that some military folks should do a Lyme disease survey. I've not been on this property, but it has a lot of vegetation, a lot of wooded area, et cetera. And again, this was probably in the early 1990s, I suppose. I don't remember exactly. But anyway, so two of our Navy entomologists were sent there. This is in Washington, D.C., obviously. They were sent there to do a Lyme disease survey. And one of the two entomologists had been in the Navy all of about 3 weeks. And so, you know, they showed up with all their equipment, the usual things, and they were going to look for evidence of infection there. And they did the usual things and put out some dry ice traps and some traps for rodents. And they came back the next morning, of course, checked in with security, which, as you can imagine, is very tight. And then they went onto the grounds in their camouflage uniforms to pick up all their equipment and their samples. Well, during this time, there was a shift in the security detail. Uh-oh, do you see what's coming here? And the word did not get past that these two folks in camouflage uniforms were going to come walking up pretty soon carrying a bunch of weird looking things that these security guys had never seen. So as our two entomologists were backing out of a wooded area carrying some live rodent traps, they heard that unmistakable sound of which is a shotgun locking and loading. And eventually it all got worked out. But, you know, it was kind of a tense moment there, especially probably for that kid who'd been all of about 3 weeks. He probably was wondering what he got into. So what can we learn from a situation like this? Well, the first one is always be aware of your circumstances and think about them ahead of time. Every situation's a little bit different. These folks probably realized going in that this is the property and the living quarters of the Vice President of the United States, so things might be a little bit different there. It applies when you're out and about on, certain types of property as well. And people are always, always, always watching you, as you know, especially if you're a public servant. So be aware of your circumstances. Second, and this is kind of the corollary of don't overreact, stay calm. When you have somebody standing there and they're pointing a weapon at you, there are certain things that you don't want to do, and I'll just leave it at that. And then finally, it's always good to have a standard operating procedure. One of the things that should have been done here was to know exactly when the security shifts changed, because to keep the security folks sharp, they probably changed multiple times a day. But even when you're out in the field, particularly for certain things that you do, you probably do have standard operating procedures, but it's always a good idea to take a look at your programs and see if you need to either write new ones or revise them to keep up with the times. Number 5.
And I hate to interrupt. I just wanted to give you a brief reminder. You got about 8 minutes left.
According to my watch, I have 20 minutes left. I have a full hour. Is that not correct?
Stan, you're fine. We are a little bit behind. We'll catch up.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
I'll try to speed it up, but I was told I would have a full hour.
The hour's all yours. Thank you.
We're in Vietnam now, and this was a situation with a joint medical conference that I helped to organize. And after it was all over, the senior officers from the U.S. Navy and the Vietnam Medical Department went out to celebrate. And they took us to a restaurant, and they said, "Oh, you're going to love everything here." And the first thing that happened was out came sort of a recycling container with 2 smaller soft-shelled turtles. This is the largest soft-shell turtle ever captured in the world that you're looking at, believe it or not. It actually died. And they raised these turtles up and proceeded to slice the necks. And when they started bleeding, they gathered our oversized shot glasses and started putting turtle blood into each of our glasses. Well, I wasn't feeling so good anyway. But then what they did was right behind our table, there were these large bottles of snakes with preservative in them. And they simply opened one of them and took a little dipper cup, and we each got a ladle full of whatever that material was, layered in on top of our turtle blood. So I'm thinking to myself, wow, cold-blooded animal, formaldehyde. I wonder if any parasites are going to live in that. Maybe I'll try it. So I kind of thought of it as a reptilian Bloody Mary, if you will. But what do we learn from this one? Well, remember when you go overseas that not everybody lives like Americans. And that may sound like a captain obvious statement, but you're not in Kansas anymore. And just like we like to do here when we host folks, they want to impress you and they want you to try certain things. And many times it can be an uncomfortable situation. And sometimes you just got to take one for the team. You got to go along with it. But it's okay sometimes to say no. The universal sign is you sort of rub your stomach and shake your head like you're not feeling very well. And that's understood in every country that I've ever worked in, all 35 or 40 of them. I didn't know you meant crash course literally. We're now in Venezuela. I know many of you know my dear friend Joe Conlon, who's a great friend to mosquito control and just retired. He and I were deployed along with several folks to Venezuela to do aerial spraying for a dengue epidemic. Unfortunately, we were in some helicopters that were poorly maintained. They were being flown by Venezuelan pilots who decided not to follow the spray routes that we had drawn out for them, but they wanted to go over and fly around their girlfriend's apartment complex. And we ended up hitting something resembling one of these. The short story is everybody in the helicopter should have all been killed. We weren't, obviously. I'll just put that out there. But I do keep this on my desk. That's a piece of the helicopter windshield that imploded. You can barely see some scrape marks on there toward the top from the power line that we hit. But literally, we should have all been killed. And one of the reasons why we weren't is the yellow circle there shows you something that's designed to cut these power lines. We managed to sort of waddle down, auto-rotate is the proper term, and we landed in the parking lot of a supermarket at 5 o'clock on Friday night. In Australia, the same title. We were on a joint training exercise with 28,000 American and Australian troops called Operation Tandem Thrust. I'm not sure how that one ever got cleared by the screeners, but it did. And we had a small public health team there to look for some viruses. Well, unfortunately, we were out and about, and I was in the back seat of this Toyota Land Cruiser that ended up down in a very rocky ditch for reasons that I won't go into today, but I was pretty much out of it for a day and a half. This is along the side of the road, and I'm there on the backboard. They asked me what year it was, and I said 1972, and they said, "Who's president?" And I said, "Richard Nixon." And of course, those of you who know me know I could have just been bullshitting them and making all that up, but I was really, really out of it. So this one really, really, really applies today to every single one of you. You have to maintain your equipment. I don't care what it is. And I know I've been in a lot of mosquito abatement districts, and frequently you can eat off the floor. The trucks are all shiny, but maintaining your equipment, whether it's your vehicles or your collecting equipment, is a key to success. Safety first and safety always. I used to work for an admiral who would say, if you're not sick of hearing yourself talk about safety, you're not talking about it enough. And finally, how about this one? No distracted driving. The reason that Toyota Land Cruiser went in the ditch there was the driver reached down to move his camera so a Diet Coke didn't spill on it, and we went off the shoulder down into that hole. So now you know why my brain is the way that it is. It's because of these two traumatic, no comment, Scott, thank you very much. I almost got killed twice for this, back to Venezuela. When that dengue deployment was over, we were invited on a Monday or Tuesday night, strangely enough, and at 10 o'clock at night, which didn't seem right, to the home of the Minister of Health who had been hosting us. So we drove over there, and when we showed up and got out of the car in the driveway, we heard the shotgun sound again. The short story is, it turned out we were not supposed to go to his home. We were supposed to meet at his office, and we got the wrong information. When we showed up, unbeknownst to us, there were several media outlets there, and the cameras were rolling. They wanted interviews, etc. And then we're all sitting around the table, about 10 of us, and the Minister of Health is, thanking us and saying what a great job we did and how it strengthened our countries. And we were thinking, oh, this is pretty cool. We're going to get something really nice out of this, maybe a plaque or a really cool Venezuelan souvenir or something. And literally the Minister of Health reached into a paper bag, not unlike this one, and slid across the table to each one of us a key ring, much like you would get out of a quarter machine in one of those plastic things. Well, I thought Joe Conlon was going to bust a gut. He was already very angry. So what does this story teach us? Manage your expectations in your daily life, even your personal lives, but professional lives particularly. Manage your expectations about people that you're working with, about the size of your problems, budgets, whatever it is. Try to keep those things in check. Many of you, I'm sure, have dealt with this, but never, ever, ever forget the impact of the media. I've got a little more about that on one of the next slides. And verify uncertainties. We knew from the beginning when we were invited to his private home at 10 o'clock at night that didn't sound right, but we didn't ask anybody about it, and we should have. Things aren't always as you expect. One of the things that you do as a military entomologist is you do pre-deployment briefings on what the threats are from a preventive medicine point of view that the deploying troops might face. And this was in Hawaii, and I was very eager to get in front of a bunch of these young Marines and talk to them about vector-borne diseases, because I thought I could really get the message across to them. And one of the topics that I chose was filariasis. Well, I showed them the very famous photograph, which I don't have here, but this is a person who has the chronic manifestation known as elephantiasis. But I showed them that classic picture of a man carrying his private parts in a wheelbarrow because of the swelling. And it totally backfired on me. I thought they would say, wow, this is, I need to follow these preventive medicine guidance. Literally, one of the Marines said, and I'm sort of quoting here, damn doc, where do I go to get that? Because he thought that would be fun. And I just didn't think of it that way. So it was not what I was expected. And what did I learn from it? Well, Now, this applies to all of us. Know your audience. It's always a good idea when you're going to talk to a group to try to do a little work ahead of time. And I still do this with every lecture I give. Try to find out who's going to be in that audience. In our case, are there people from the health department? Are there administrators? Are there people who control the purse change? Or is it all just, am I preaching to the choir? It's always a good idea to find that out. Be careful what you ask for because you might get it. I had pleaded to get to do one of these, and as I said, it kind of backfired. And use a sounding board. I could have easily gone to somebody a little more senior and said, hey, I've got this opportunity and I'm thinking about doing this, and maybe somebody who knew the Marine Corps culture a little better than I did might have said, yeah, let's look at your slides and maybe a couple of these aren't such a good idea. So it's always a good idea to ask advice if you're not sure. Troops and snakes. Military members will run up a hill towards a machine gun nest and enjoy it, but you show them a snake on deployment and sometimes they faint. This was one of Joe Conlon's stories, and you're looking at a desert horned viper. They bury themselves in the sand such as this. And Joe's story goes a little bit like this, and some of you have probably heard this. There were some Marines, it was nighttime, they were in a tactical situation, so they were using, the colored flashlights and stuff, and nature called. And so one of them was finishing his duty, and he reached down to get the toilet paper, and one of these baby horned vipers had decided that little paper roll was a pretty good place to hang out. And when the Marine picked it up and, cleaned himself after his duty, the snake, of course, took exception to that and bit him. And Joe would tell this, yeah, that's where he bit him. And Joe would tell this story, and the audience would get really quiet, and Joe would take the pregnant pause, and then he would say, and when Saddam Hussein's troops found out that the U.S. Marines wiped their backside, quote, with poisonous snakes, they surrendered in droves. But Marines, particularly, and snakes don't mix. Back to Australia, we were in our little lab one day, and a young Marine came in with one of these like 5-gallon jars that you'd get pickles in or something at Costco. And he had a 7-foot Australian taipan, one of the deadliest snakes in the world, inside that jar, walking into our lab. One bite from one of these snakes can kill approximately 64 people. And I looked at him and I said, Marine, how'd you get that snake in there? And he looked at me like I'd been ate up by the dumbass. And he said, well, Doc, I just picked it up and stuffed it in there. I thought you guys might want it as a present. Well, we didn't, but once we got over the shock, we did put it on display. So lessons learned, Marines and snakes don't mix. I'm just going to leave it at that. Seeing is believing. I mean, sometimes you're going to really be surprised, and you got to be ready for some of these things and expect the unexpected, especially in a field situation like this, but that can apply in your lives as well. Just got a couple more to go here. Why let truth get in the way? You're going to probably recognize this. That's a camel spider. They generally get no bigger than about, about 5 to 6 inches. In the yellow circle there, though, is their head, and roughly 1/3 of their body is just nothing but these very strong mandibles, which are designed to rip up and tear and catch and eat things that they're going to eat. And you encounter them a lot when you're on a deployment, when you're, doing digging and stuff like this, and you disturb their habitat. Well, what happened was this picture started circulating. And what you're seeing there are 2 camel spiders hooked together, and they look like together they are the size of that troop's leg. So, but what's really happening is, and you can kind of see it on the right there, somebody's holding those 2 spiders way far away from that person right in front of the camera, and it's making it look bigger. Well, when people saw this, rumors started circulating that, oh my gosh, these things are 3 feet across and they can leap tall buildings in a single bound, and they eat camels for lunch, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that wasn't true. And so people started sending over things that they thought the troops could use against these camel spiders. And we had some rather serious accidents because of that. So real news doesn't sell. It wasn't very exciting to say that these things were only 5 or 6 inches. Idle time creates myths. And you always have to beware of the do-gooders, particularly when you are in disaster situations or things such as this. This is the USS Blue Ridge Command and Control ship of the 7th Fleet. It was in Southeast Asia to support that joint training exercise in Australia. And suddenly it was put into quarantine by the Australian authorities, who are incredibly strict, and rightly so. And it was put into quarantine and was not going to be allowed to go anywhere. I mean, this ship is in charge of every ship that was in, the South Pacific Theater. And it was because within the last year, the Blue Ridge had been in Vladivostok, Russia, an endemic area for the Asian gypsy moth. So we got a call down in the training area, and they said, can you help with this? And we said, okay, we'll do our best. And so we were flown up there. I had never seen an Asian gypsy moth, but we went online. We learned all about it, as much as we could at least. We went to a small store when we got to the town where the Blue Ridge was, kind of like a Kmart, and we bought what we thought would look like collecting gear. We bought some magnifying glasses, some mirrors for looking around things. We got some binoculars, some little vials, stuff like that, and made up what we thought would look like Asian gypsy moth collecting kits. We had the entire run of the ship for 2.5 full days. Whatever I said went. And we had a plan. We divided, we had several inspecting teams. We divided the ship up. We made sure that every area was inspected at least by 2 different teams, et cetera, et cetera. So we had a very solid plan. And I'm happy to say that after 3 days, I met with the senior quarantine inspector for Australia, went over exactly what we did, and I signed an official letter stating that as far as we were concerned, there were no Asian gypsy moth on this ship. What did that teach us? Have a solid plan, and we did. We had it on paper. We were all able to talk about it. We had 4 people on the team, by the way, and I think we impressed them. We acted very professional the whole time. We even made up little business cards that said we were Asian gypsy moth inspectors, and never let them see you sweat. We never at any time let on to anybody that we weren't quite sure what we were doing. We did find, by the way, we found 2 adult moths of other species on the ship that we captured, and we found 1 egg mass. So it sort of looked like we knew what we were doing. All right, here's my last one. Tippy the tapeworm goes viral. Again in Australia, a Marine came in one day carrying another one of those 5-gallon jars that was full of his feces. And on top of it was about a 7.5-foot section of tapeworm. Fortunately, with my parasitology training, I knew we had to figure out if it was a beef tapeworm or pork tapeworm. This is what the head of one of them looks like. It's kind of a nasty looking creature. But all those sections that you see there are nothing but proglottids. They're just bags of eggs. And the way that you tell whether it's a pork or beef tapeworm is by injecting some India ink into one of those proglottids and counting those uterine branches that you see there, all those black things. And it's important to distinguish because the larvae of the pork tapeworm can get into a person's brain and cause something called cysticercosis, which is very nasty, whereas the beef tapeworm is essentially harmless. This is Captain Greg Parker, who was the chief, the head of the U.S. military delegation there, and he wanted to take a section of Tippy home with him. So I'm just about done here, but I just want to leave you with one lesson from this one, and it applies to almost everything that we do in life. And here it is. You got to know your shit no matter what you're doing, or people are going to see through you. So this is where it all started back in 1989. Believe it or not, that's me. That's where it ended at my retirement ceremony. And as I bring in this a little bit outdated and a little bit insensitive quote that you've probably all heard, I draw your attention to the flag that's in the red circle. That was my Navy retirement flag, and I'm very, very proud to say you can have it flown wherever you want to in the world, as long as there's somebody there to do it. That flag was flown over Culp's Hill on the Gettysburg battlefield on July 3rd of 2012, which was to the day the 149th anniversary of Gettysburg. So there's my contact information. I hope you've enjoyed this. The talk's a little bit different. I have an alternate identity now known as Captain Stan, the Mosquito Man, and you can find that on our Catchmaster web pages, which are there on the left. And here endeth the lesson for today, and thanks for your attention.